Hello there. Today I'm hugely excited by my tasting because I've been sent a wine to try that hasn't actually been released on the market. It's one of 3 samples of the new releases that I've been sent by Tenuta San Guido, the home of Italy's legendary Sassicaia. So the first one I'm looking at is the 2024 vintage of Le Difese. And Le Difese is a blend of Sangiovese and Cabernet Sauvignon that effectively works as the third brand as opposed to third wine of Tenuta San Guido. So Tenuta San Guido is a 2,500 hectare estate that sits on the Tuscan coast in the Maremma region near the village of Bolgheri. Now the land comprising the current estate has been in the hands of the Della Gherardesca family for over 1,200 years. The Della Gherardescas are an old Tuscan noble family and have owned this land since the Middle Ages. And the estate Tenuta San Guido is named after San Guido de Gehardesca, who's a 13th century ancestor of theirs. Now it was in 1930 that Marchese Mario Incisa della Rocchetta married Clarice della Gherardesca, and the couple were given this estate as a wedding gift by her parents. Now the Marchese had studied agriculture and in his native Piedmont had been experimenting with the idea of producing wines. Now he was a lover of Bordeaux wines and instantly recognised some similarities in the style of the soils here, with clays, gravels and underlying limestone to those found in the Grave region of Bordeaux. And he began experimenting growing several grape varieties, but especially his interest was in cultivating Cabernet Sauvignon. He planted his first vineyard here in 1944, one of the higher altitude sites around 400 metres above sea level, near the Castiglioncello di Bolgheri fortress, which sits at the upper inland end of the estate. His first wine was produced in 1945, but wasn't particularly well received by other locals to whom he showed it. They just weren't used to wines with structure that were meant to age. And so after a couple of vintages, Mario paid slightly less attention to the Cabernet Sauvignon. However, subsequently tasting some of the wines he'd made and talking to relatives of his by marriage, the Antinoris family, eventually led to them producing their first commercial vintage, the 1968, a wine that was released in 1971 to great acclaim, despite the fact that it could only be labelled as a vin de tavola, because there was no appellation or DOC for wines made from Cabernet Sauvignon covering this region. The wine, however, proved popular and other estates started to grow up around Sassicaia. So by 1994, Bolgheri had been granted its own DOC. In 2001, the estate started producing another wine, Guidalberto, a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. The first vintage of Le Difese came in 2002, and Bolgheri Sassicaia became its own DOC in 2013. Now, as I've said, this is a very large estate, so as well as having somewhere in the region of 100 hectares of vines, other interests on the estate are the Dormello Oligatia racing stables, the Pardelais de Bolgheri Wildlife Refuge, which is a wetland area that's frequented by migratory birds. They also have interests in forestry, over 10,000 olive trees producing some really rather good olive oil, and there are other agricultural crops planted on a rotational basis, cereals, etc. Now the wine is called Le Difese in reference to the defensive tusks of the wild boar, and if you look at the label there, you'll just see marked out in gold the tusk there, and it's a boar being chased by hounds. One of the hounds also has a gold collar on there. And this symbolises some of the sort of the wild nature of the Maremma region. In fact, they do still have boar living in the Pardelais de Bolgheri Wildlife Reserve. So yes, this is a representation of something of the sort of the wild nature of the Maremma region. Having said that, I also have a note saying that their viticulture is certified as sustainable by an organisation that has the initials SQNPI. Now the 2024 season was preceded by a cold, wet autumn and a mild, dry winter. So in fact there was some sort of earlier than usual heat accumulation, but then in late February and March temperatures dropped again and continuous rainfall ensured there were good water reserves in the soils. Now, cool temperatures in March tended to bring the start of vegetative growth back to a sort of an average date, and an initially quite warm April prompted an early and very uniform bud break. In the second half of April, however, temperatures dropped once again, fortunately without any frost or snowfall. May and June gave good conditions for flowering and fruit set. July was warm but somewhat breezy, resulting in veraison, the colouring of the grapes, happening about a week earlier than usual. These warm temperatures continued through into the beginning of August, but in mid-August there was a weather front that cooled conditions down again. The cooling influence, particularly in the nights, ensured that phenolic, like tannic ripeness, was in line with technical ripeness for things such as sugars and alcohols. Now, the wine is a blend of 75% of Sangiovese with 25% of Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's the Cabernet Sauvignon that's actually grown on the estate. The label mentions that this is imbogliato, like bottled at Tenuta San Guido. So while the Cabernet Sauvignon is grown here and therefore will be fruit from vineyards that normally produce Guidalberto or Sassicaia itself, the Sangiovese is grown in various areas of Tuscany. Now, fermentation takes place in temperature-controlled stainless steel tanks, and they simply note that that was completed by the end of October. Maturation took place in second and third fill oak barriques. Most of these were French, and they'd previously been used to age the Guidalberto. Sometimes in the past they've used a small portion of American oak to age Guidalberto. Possibly that is the case here. Possibly a small portion may have seen some time in Hungarian oak as well. After approximately a year, the wine is transferred back to stainless steel tanks, where it is tartrate stabilised to ensure tartaric acid crystals won't manifest themselves in the wine. And this is done by holding it for a period of a couple of days at about 3 or 4 degrees C. The wine is then bottled and will have spent 7 months in bottle by the time it's released in May. And in 2024, they produced 375,000 bottles of Le Difese. So let's take a look at it, shall we? First thing that's very obvious is actually this is a relatively pale wine. This is sort of pale to medium, ruby, perhaps even sort of cherry red. It's got quite a vibrant, bright colour there. And swirling it, the wine has 13.5% alcohol, and it's actually forming some quite vivid tears on the side of the glass there. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? I have remarked before when I've tasted other vintages of Le Difese quite how aromatically precise it can be. And this really does have a really lovely intensity of vibrant, juicy red fruit, sort of mulberries, raspberries, that sort of thing. But that's oversimplifying it, because there are plenty of spicy elements and some savoury notes in here as well. The aromas have a good intensity and a lovely preciseness. So these notes of mulberry are supported by notes of cinnamon, cedarwood, and then there are sort of savoury umami notes, almost hinting at a mushroominess. Yet I'm not sure that I want to use that as a reference, because normally I'd use that to describe maturity, whereas this is a savoury note over the vivid, bright fruit. That's a wine with some really very compelling aromas, and I'm very much enjoying just nosing it at the moment. So let's have a taste. On the palate, there's a wonderful, fresh acidity. There's a juicy red fruit, but it's incredibly well supported by some lovely, fine tannins. There's a really good balance here, because the tannins are introducing a bitterness, but at the same time they're managing not to be drying or astringent, and actually they're working with the acidity to ensure there's a wonderful, mouth-watering freshness. The wine is at best medium body. It has structure, it has fine tannins, and they have a fairly angular nature, but actually there's a richness to the fruit that's rounding that out really quite nicely. It's not a big wine, but it's smooth, it's plush. There's almost a smooth cocoa powder note to the plushness. Yet the finish has this vibrant, raspberry-like red fruit that is supported but not overwhelmed by some really quite powerful sweet spices derived from the oak. It's a wine with lovely acidity and really quite superb balance. I've long thought that Le Difese is a very high quality wine, certainly at a very attractive price compared to either of its siblings, the Guidalberto or the Sassicaia, and I think this is an exceptional example of that. As of yet, I've not seen any published scores for Le Difese. In general, across all the vintages, the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score gives this 89 out of 100. Personally, I think this is noticeably above that level, and if I'm being asked to score it, I would be looking at giving this a score of 91 out of 100. I really do love its balance, its definition. It's got amazing intensity for what seems to be quite light in colour, not particularly full-bodied. It's a wine with precision and elegance that's delicious now. Given its acidity and its lovely fine structure, I would be very happy to keep this and age this out to 10 years, possibly even longer. So I will be sure to leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so that when prices are available, you can see how much it is and if it's available near you. Because I do think, in a fine wine context, this is a superb example of Le Difese, and it's a real bargain. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button, that would be fantastic. If you are watching these tastings and you haven't actually subscribed yet, it would be fantastic if you could consider doing that. That would really help me to develop the channel. Have your subscription, and do also set yourself an alert so you can be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. That would be a fantastic endorsement. And if you have any comments or questions, do please pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for joining me, and I do hope that maybe you'll make some more time and come and join me for another tasting in the very near future. If nothing else, I've got 2 more wines from Tenuta San Guido to taste in the next few days, so hopefully we'll see you there. Till then, bye for now.